All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started right now. Welcome to University of Phoenix Educational Equity Webinar Series. We would like to start by acknowledging the land in which we occupy, Akimel Aton, Pipash and Yavapai, people's traditional territories. We invite you to share where you're joining us in the chat, please, and perhaps your own land acknowledgement if you're not sure how you're interested and you're interested in learning more about this. We're going to share a link in the chat that you can learn where you're, what lands you're sitting on. Thank you. All right, next slide. The Educational Equity Webinar Series was created with the hope to foster a learning environment where we can explore paths to empower individual action towards greater unity and impact change. As a higher education institution with more than 50% underrepresented students employed across different industries, it is our hope to facilitate thought-provoking conversations to prepare and encourage the practice of inclusive leadership in a culturally complex society. Today's topic is Healing Racism Beyond the Dialogue, Part 1. What is racism? This is the first of a two-part series to establish the reality of racism, followed by some strategy for healing at personal, group, institutional, and systemic levels. We're definitely looking forward to our speaker today. Can you go to the next slide, please? So before we move forward, we want to make sure to invite you to register for our Part 2 webinar next month on May 20th. This is a QR code, or the link is in the chat as well. And if we can move forward, please. A little housekeeping before we get started. We want to first set the stage for today's session. Listed here are guidelines we believe essential to fostering respectful conversations. We value your participation in potentially uncomfortable discussions, as this only reinforces our willingness to learn and grow. We encourage you to share your experiences and perspective in the chat box or through your questions. Please be respectful and considerate of all human beings represented in this session. We ask all participants to contribute to an atmosphere of mutual respect and sensitivity. We're connected because we are all human. So in addition, we highly encourage you to connect with one another. Use this platform to network, share your LinkedIn profile, any helpful resources related to today's topic. We definitely want this to be a learning environment for all of us as we go through our own journeys as inclusive leaders. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat, especially in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be brought up at the end, and if we have any additional time, we'll do a Q&A at the end. All right, let's get to the meat of this session, our speaker. Today, we're joined by Jackie Starks. She's a certified diversity executive and independent consultant of Jack of all trades. Jackie is committed to inclusive excellence and making a sustainable difference. She has been recognized by distinguished organizations, offering us only a small glimpse of Jackie's tireless work for equity, inclusion, mediation, and nonviolence practices that make a difference. Jackie is also the manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Maricopa County Community College District, co-lead of the Healing Racism Committee, co-founder of the Arizona Multicultural Education Conference, and sits on various councils and boards. So as you can see, Jackie is the epitome of Jack of all trades. I think here at University of Phoenix, we're very fortunate to collaborate with Jackie over the years and learn from her leadership and passion for advocacy and justice. And today we have the opportunity to share her wisdom with all of you. Now, without further ado, we'll turn over our time to Jackie.
Thank you so much, Saray. I'm sharing my PowerPoint with everyone. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Saray, I really love that bio. I'm going to have you write it for me. I'm like, who is that? Oh, thank you. That's me. I appreciate it. Anyway, I'm so glad to be here with you all today. My pronouns, she, her, hers, Aya. You can also call me Boo and Queen. I learned that from Shamara, so I'm definitely going to own that here this morning. So as we talk about healing racism, sorry, I'm going to back up a screen here. As we talk about healing racism, I put that question out there, what is racism? Quite often I will have people come to me and they'll say that we want to have a conversation about healing racism. We really want to get to healing racism. And I have to ask, what do you mean by that? When you say you want to heal racism, what are you talking about? How do you define racism? So, and quite often I will also hear, well, I have people in my organizations, they don't understand. I feel like I'm always preaching to the choir. Well, the choir is not always in tune. So we always have a space to grow and understand. Before we can heal racism, there's so many things that we have to do before that. First of all, we have to understand it. And if we have people in our organizations or in our space and they don't believe in racism, or they're going, I don't get it, how can they heal? How can you get them on board? Right? So what we really want to take a step back before we get into healing is really thinking about, what is racism? What are we talking about? So keep this in mind. Before you can heal racism, you have to end racism. And before you can end racism, you have to understand it, you have to acknowledge it, and you have to really be real and clear about what racism is and how it operates. As an individual, in your groups, in your organizations, in your homes, you have to understand that. So understand, acknowledge, and then we can get to healing. Now, some of you are probably writing that down because you're thinking 4 simple steps. Not 4 simple steps, because they require so much to make that happen. How many of you are familiar with the National Day of Racial Healing? Right? If you missed it this year, it was January 19th of 2021. It's going to be January 18th of 2022. I had a few people participate in that, and it's a fabulous day. I encourage you to participate. And they said, well, I went to this day of racial healing. I'm like, yes, and what do you get out of that? It was fabulous. So what are you going to do for the rest of the year? Well, I'm going to wait until next year. That's not it. It's fabulous to have a day of racial healing, but you can't heal racism in a day, correct? If we could heal racism in a day, sign me up. We'd all sign up for that course or that space. So this is a good space to understand some things and hopefully to energize you for the work that you have to do on a continuous, do continuously every day, that you have to work with that, okay? And I also put this up here to talk about the National Day of Racial Healing, because we know we can't heal racism in a day. So I don't want you to, after today, and then if you sign, you all will sign up for part 2. You're going to need both of this. Or you finish after part 2 and you're going, there's still so much to do. You're not going to get everything in these 2 hours, but we're going to give you a glimpse of some things that you really need to do when we talk about really healing racism. So let me put you all to work. I'd like you to think about, and you can jot down on a notepad, or you can put in the chat. We do have people monitoring the chat. If you were to define race and racism, what is your working definition of race and racism? So I'm going to pause here and give you all a minute or two to think about that, write it on your notes, or go ahead and put it in the chat. So what is your working definition of race and racism? Prejudice plus power, I see. Race is made up of social construct, okay? Racism is a created construction that allows one group to dominate another, okay? All right. Human race. I have the chat, but I'd love to. I know I have Tandra and others monitoring the chat. So let me have you, Tandra, if you can share some things that you see that's there in the chat.
Definitely, Jackie. We have here an artificial construct used to categorize people based upon skin color, nationality, or religion. Race is contrived. Racism is racial prejudice plus power to institutionalize that prejudice. Racism has to do with the systemic issues in all levels of society that disproportionately impact BIPOC. Race is the human race. Other than that, race is social construct. Race is a way to divide and control people, an inferior way to accuse and or discriminate another human being, a systematic injustice. It's subjective. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group.
All right, just maybe one or two more.
Okay. It is a made up concept to take land and property from those without power. And race relates to one's ethnicity and perhaps cultural background. Racism is when one race assumes, it's moving fast. Racism is when one race assumes it is dominant or superior to another.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tandra. I love it that it's moving fast and you all are participating and contributing. So again, I want you to keep in mind how you define race and racism, because that's an important thing. Think about that. If you've ever been in a situation where you wanted to have a conversation with someone about race or racism and you all were dismissing one another, and you threw the words out there, about having this conversation about racism, but you were not seeing it in the same way. You did not have the same concept about what it is. So this is why we have to take a step back and really define what we're talking about. And you all have a really good handle on that. So I have another question for you. This is like the chicken and the egg question. Based on your, sorry, I'm losing things here. Based on your working definition, about that. Based on your working definition, which came first, race or racism? Let me open my curtains again. So based on your working definition, which came first, race or racism? And Tandra, again, you can tell me what you're seeing in the chat, please.
Definitely. We're seeing a lot of racism. Most of the comments are racism.
Okay. Okay, that's good. So most of you said racism came before race, again, and it depends on how you define this, but I'm going to propose to you, let me propose something for you and see what you think about this. Just ponder this. And what I think, and this is my own Jackie's perspective based on how I define race and racism, if it weren't for race, which is the racialization and grouping of people in a system that was set up for white supremacy as an ideology to exploit other racialized groups of people, then racism would not exist. So I'm proposing that if we did not have the race group set up, then we would not have racism. And other people might say, well, because of racism and setting up the systems, then you had to have these races to make that happen. However you see that is fine. I'm just going to propose that for you to ponder. And what I'd like to do is share, I'm going to share a video clip with you. It's How America Invented Race. And this is a 9-minute clip. And as you watch this clip, what I'd like you to do is think about your working definition of race, because we're going to start with race first. I'm going to start with race maybe as a foundation for racism. See what you think about this, and then we'll come back and have a conversation after the clip. Jeremy, have the clip. Thank you.
Hey, you, Caucasian.
Hey, man.
Hey, Blanco.
Gringo.
Paleface. I gotta tell you a secret.
Rooney.
Hunk. Muzungu.
This might come as a surprise, but
White people, listen to this. In America in the early 1600s, you didn't exist.
You didn't exist?
I hate to break it to you like this. Listen to what your history books missed. What would be made white were completely unrelated, under-melanated people. Frankenstein, collaged by an optical illusion. The ultimate mirage called race. A social construction like Santa Claus. Back in the day, y'all either English or Scot, Irish Catholic or Protestant, land owning or not. But you can't have white without black in America. Back before we was Captain America, black wasn't a race. Africans came from different nations, like in Ndongo, where Queen Nzinga reigned. Indigenous were the same. Powhatan, Doag, regardless of tribe, melanin didn't determine fate. Skin color didn't make a difference, no matter what hue your flesh was tinted in, cause your complexion wasn't kinship. and pigment was insignificant. It didn't prevent you from certain privileges. This is the story of how skin became color. Color became race, and race became power. The creation of the Caucasian, white Aryan. It's the story of how white became American.
The census says your race is white. Don't believe the hype.
1650, Jamestown. Meet William Berkeley, appointed by King Charles II of England to govern colonial Virginia. He rules with an iron hand and enriches a small cadre of English landowners. They grow tobacco. The sweet leaf is gold. America's first road to riches. Yeah. Hey, to grow the crop, they kidnap and capture men, engaged in human trafficking and trap the African. And if they can't steal the labor, then they use lies as lures, of false promises as tools to recruit all the poor from Bristol to Liverpool. Little did they know that they were in for something cruel. Jamestown was their destination. When Berkeley looks at his servants, what does he see? Color, of course, but color doesn't mean much to a man of means.
They're heathens, waste, dirty, diseased, lazy animals. I would sooner call my hound brother than a servant of any shade.
Under God and by law, he has the right to whip, maim, starve, buy, or sell them at his pleasure. But he fears them. He should. The rich are few, and the poor are many. It's almost impossible to imagine now, but the poor see themselves as one. They have a common bond and a common enemy. Together. 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 The Africans and English worked together. They labored and lived, prayed and made a life together. Stole, escaped, hold and wait together. They got lashed and went to jail together. Worked hard and catch hell together. It wasn't criminal for them to love together. Got married and had kids together. The colony was filled with different shades together. Mahogany, tan, olive, and beige together. Molasses, dark chocolatey flavors together. Peach, bronze, amber, and brown. But very soon life would change up in Jamestown. There's no lifetime slavery yet. The indentured Europeans and Africans can still buy their freedom. Released from bondage, they'd set out in search of land. For these new frontiersmen, freedom is a rotten promise. The rich own all the good soil, and the indigenous tribes desperately grasp for the rest, fighting for every acre they have left. The frontiersmen seethe with each new tax, each broken promise, each death, each rich man that grows richer, each poor man that grows poor, until they can't take it anymore. 1676, time to take matters into their own hands. They cast one Nathaniel Bacon as leader, the son of an aristocrat who came to the frontier after squandering his inheritance. Under Bacon, they band together to take land from the tribes and power from Berkeley. Together. 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 Get your guns, get your knives. First target is the tribes. Kill the men, women, and the children. 100 men turned into 1,000. A Passenger guerrilla army is astounding. And Dongo, English, Angolan, Irish fought together to abolish all the tyrants and the snakes, ready to mount the heads on stakes. Enough of these rich men, of these false men, corrupt men. Light the torches and set Jamestown ablaze. Let it burn, let it burn. Jamestown put the ashes in an urn. 100 years before the revolution, Africans and Europeans were in union. Let it burn, let it burn. The British never wanted us to earn. So bring the fire to the upper classes. We can make a better future from the ashes. Berkeley watches Jamestown burn, and he burns with vengeance.
The waste must be cleansed from God's green earth.
Behind a British gunship, retribution. Berkeley hangs 20 and scatters the rest into the wilderness. The rich of Jamestown know it could have been their own necks hanging from the end of a poor man's noose. To survive as rich men, as powerful men, they vow never to let the poor rise up again as one. But how? What scheme? What deception? In 1681, white will appear in a legal document for the first time in history when Virginia bans Africans from marrying whites. One law of dozens creating and separating the races. Blacks across the colonies will be enslaved for life, no longer treated as human, but as property. Poor whites were handed the whip. The rich exploited their ignorance. They traded rebellious plots for managing slave auction blocks, and any chance for both of their freedom was lost. It doesn't happen overnight, but the rich divided people by phenotype. Melanin, skin color, you dark, you light. Your life or death could be determined by the question, are you white? Well, are you white? Go ahead. Take a look in the mirror. Ask yourself, am I white? We are no longer allowed.
To marry?
We are no longer allowed.
To start a family?
We are no longer allowed. Can we
You
say
can
it
go ahead and
loud?
stop
Should
the
we stay
clip. We'll go ahead and
That we have
stop
a
right
child?
there.
Can we stay alive?
We not coming.
Thank you. I forgot to advertise the next one as you move on from that. So before I pull my screen, I just want to take a minute to, have you all think about that 9-minute clip. Does that cause you to rethink your working definition of race? Does it reaffirm your working definition of race? Does it allow you to see race and racism differently from where you started? Or again, does it reaffirm that for you? So I wish I could unmute you all so we could have a conversation, but go ahead and in the chat, and Tandra's right there to see what your thoughts are.
We already have a response here, Jackie. It says, this is my reasoning for stating race came first. Racism escalated by means of biases and or views of various cultures and races. It reaffirms that race came first. Race has always been about divide and conquer. Enslaved, not slave.
Okay. Excellent.
Those are the comments so far.
Wonderful. So hopefully that it's 9 minutes and it just gave you time to really think about that. And that's something that we don't dig into, is really the history and understanding the foundation. So I go back to, how can you heal something that you don't understand? And if we don't understand the foundation of race and how it's in the very roots of this United States system that we're in, then it's going to be difficult to create the racial healing that we need to create. And another question always comes up, when I do this work, is that, you all talk so much about Black and white, and there are other racial groups. Absolutely. All racial groups have been impacted, but we have to go back to the root. The root was about Black and white. That's not because Black people want to be be a part of Let Me Win the Oppression Olympics. That is the way that it was set up. That's another thing that we have to reconcile and understand and say, yes, it was set up to separate white from Black. And of course, other people were impacted, but that was huge in terms of how our systems were set up. Now we have to take a look at the way the United States system were set up, because business, industry, families, and many things that we do to operate within our own was established as a result of this foundation. Right? Makes sense. Any questions? Again, if you have questions and you put them in the chat or Q&A, they will definitely let me know. So let me go through and review just a few other definitions when we're taking a look at race. And I'd like to, because we're talking about this system and most of us participate in the United States system of race and racism, where people will say, well, you have these constructs. So if they're just constructs, then let's just stop checking the boxes. It's not as easy as that because those boxes are based on so many different things. So let's take a look at, let me get past this, some of the US Census Bureau definitions of race so that we can see that it's a lot more than just the boxes that we're talking about here. Forward, we already saw that. Okay, so if the boxes didn't matter and there weren't consequences associated with the boxes, we wouldn't still be doing the census every 10 years, asking us to racialize ourselves. But we know that that census, there's money and all sorts of things that's attached to that. So even if we stop checking the boxes, it will still matter to different communities. So here, this US Census says that when we think about racial categories, there's, it's a social definition, and it includes racial and national origin, social cultural groups. And I love that if you look at the bullets as a part of the census, they even let you choose more now. You can be American Indian and white. They give you examples, right? And if you identify as Hispanic or Latino, then you can just pick any race. Now, again, a group of people are coming together to make these decisions based on whatever outcomes they want to achieve. And most of us didn't participate in this, but we're still impacted by that. Then they go on to define the different categories. I'm not going to read each of these for you, but they define what somebody came up with as American Indian, Alaska Native. That's one category. Another one on this past census was Asian, and who they feel belongs into the different groups of being Asian. And then the government had Black or African American, and it's a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. Think about that. Any of the Black racial groups of Africa. So the United States really get to tell this whole continent of Africa that they have racial groups. Think about that, right? So we're now dictating to other countries. And so this is why we see other places buying into this concept of racism that was constructed in our system here in the United States. You have the group that's Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. They identified in this past census. And then there was the white group. Okay, so remember we saw the Black one about the Black groups in Africa. Take a look at this one where it says white. A person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. I thought about that because we talked about the Black groups and you said North Africa. And when I look at it from my own perspective, I have Algerian family. Algeria is part of North Africa. So if I'm looking at this census and I'm racializing myself, do I get to racialize myself as white? Or do I racialize myself as Black because Algeria is a Black racial group? So again, you see how this construction happened and how we start participating and buying into this, setting the foundation that will impact people through this thing that we call racism. Go ahead, Tandra.
Jackie, if I can ask you a quick question that came in the chat, and this is one that we've seen quite a bit. Adrian says, I have a friend who said that she wanted to be considered Black, not African-American. What is appropriate, Black or African-American?
I know, I love that question. It comes up all the time. Whatever you prefer. Some people prefer African-American. We see people who say I'm a part of the African diaspora. For myself, I typically use Black only because of the fact that I do have family that's Algerian and people close to me who are Jamaican, and they don't necessarily consider themselves American. And so I feel we have an affinity through ethnicity. And so I might use the term Black. So I don't get to speak for all the Black people to say, you know what, when you leave here, call them all African Americans and all is good. We need to refer to groups of people in a way that works for that person as an individual. And we can do this. It's not difficult. We learn all the individual names, right? You know that Tandra is Tandra, Jackie's Jackie, Sarea's Saray. We can do the same thing with people racialized groups. We can refer to them in a way that they want to be referred. But of course, I would take a step back and ask myself, why do I want to know this and what am I going to do with it? Right? So those are good questions to ask yourself before you just put a whole group of people, any one person in a particular category. Thank you for that question. Thank you, Tandra. All right. So those are some Census Bureau categories. So if we think about race, and we know that it was invented, it was constructed here in the United States, and many of you put that in the chat. And we know that the way things are named, the way we name groups is also a part of white supremacy, right? It's part of a white supremacist system that says if you're racialized as white, you get advantaged in certain ways as if compared to those who are not. So with that, think about how we name, and should we think about how we refer to and reinvent naming. So here's an example. So maybe instead of calling people, instead of saying race, what about racialized groups? Because people aren't racist, but we have been racialized. Our groups have been racialized based on whatever definitions they've come up with, right? So what if we start saying racialized group of people or people who are racialized? And we love to throw around the term minority because that was written in documents that were created, right? We have minorities. Using that term minority is very pejorative to many groups of people. So instead of saying people as minority, we see people who are minoritized. So it shows that I didn't do this to myself. These groups of indigenous, Latinx, Asian people, they didn't do them to themselves. It happens as a result of something. So they have been minoritized. We even see in places like California where Latinx people are the majority and they're still called minorities, or they're called majority minority, which still is a way to racially minimize that group of people. Okay, so they have been minoritized by no fault of their own, or maybe they're just historically marginalized people who have been historically marginalized. Think about these words and how we frame them, that it changes the way we think about who they are and what they bring to the table. Now, instead of BIPOC, we are the global majority. How does that ring for you? Because again, BIPOC, and again, I don't have an issue with we use biracial, people of color, but we are the global minority of people that exist. So think about using that terminology versus terminology that was steeped in race and racism that continues to minimize. So in your organizations, in your spaces, how do you have things written in your policies? How do you refer to people? What is the language that you hear? And that makes a difference in how we see race and racism in our spaces. Okay, so just to kind of sum up the race for you, I'm going to give you the Stark's working definition of race. It's a United States construct and categorization of people. And you all are thinking, okay, Jackie, if it's a construct and a category, just a categorization, I still don't see the big deal. Okay, let's move on to a different definition. Ibrahim Kindy, on how to be an anti-racist. He defines race as a power construct of collected or merged differences. And this is the part that I highlighted. It lives socially. So whether it's imagined or real or constructed, this concept of race, it's a living thing that happens, and it lives socially in so many different spaces. This is why you can't just remove a box. This is why you can't just say it doesn't matter because it's constructed and somebody came up with it. Okay, does that make sense? If not, let me know. We've talked about race. Let's talk about racism now. So we need to understand race. And you see a little bit from my perspective why I see race as a foundation to racism, as opposed to racism being the foundation for race. And I'm sure those of you who see it the other way, you have very strong reasons for that. Go with it. I'm just giving you my perspective based on how I see this flow. Okay, so what about racism? If you all paid attention in the video clip, it talked about how skin became color and color became race. And we've talked about that categorization. So where does racism fit in? They also talked about another word. Do you all remember the other word that they mentioned? They said race became what? And I know you can unmute, but somebody put it in the chat. Race became, and I'm sure you all put this in the chat. I'm going to give you all an A+ for this. Race became power. Power is where racism comes in. Okay. These systems and structures that creates power, powers of inequity, powers that are unequal between these racialized groups, right? So this is where we see that happen. Again, if you have questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. And then I'd also like to remind you that when we talk about this power, it exists at many different levels. And we're not going to get into the levels for today, but when you come to session 2, we're going to look at these different levels and we're going to talk about what we can do with these different levels. So when you're looking at race, when you're looking at racism, when you're looking at power, we have to understand how power works at an individual level. That's between me and the person that I'm interacting with. How does this racial power work when we look at it from the group perspective? How does the racial power exist on the institutional level on how rules and policies and guidelines are written? How does it look on the systemic level, right? So you have to look at all these levels. And quite often when people focus on racial healing, they think, let's just focus on the individual. What do you need to do? What do I need to do? And that's only one part, because I, as an individual, may continue to work on myself and to learn and to really deal with my own racialized identity, understand my own history, to grieve where I've been, myself and my family from a racial lens, but I might have to deal with a group or rules or things happening in a system that as a result of that, I'm still acting in ways that might be contradictory to what I believe. So you can't deal with one piece and end racism, become anti-racist, or heal from racism without dealing with all pieces. And where institutions that are strongly embedded really have a hard time is breaking down their institutional rules and policies that have been in place for a long time. You know, I talk about dress codes. Dress codes are really an epitome of racism and white supremacy. So if we think about dress codes, how did they get implemented? Why? Who benefits from that? Look at some of the rules around dress codes and interrogate them, and then ask yourself, do we really even need a dress code once you think about why or how that code was implemented? And that would be one of those institutional things that you would want to explore. Go ahead, Tandra.
So we have a question here from a few moments ago. If we agree that racism, it's moving so fast. If we agree that racism is about power, how can this contribute to understanding if racism can exist toward white people, particularly in America?
Okay, let me let you ask that again. I think I got it. I want to make sure. This is where I wish I had the person in front of me so I can get it straight. Go ahead one more time, please, Tandra.
If we agree that racism is about power, how can this contribute to understanding if racism can exist toward white people, particularly in America?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I think if we go back and analyze this a bit, this concept of racism and power and how does it interact with whiteness, is that if you go back and look at the setup of our system set up to say, if you are white, these are the benefits of being white. This is the way that is going to operate. And I understand if you happen to be a white person, poor, female, disabled, you're probably going, I am totally disconnecting from this. So your positionality would be different from a person that is white, able-bodied, rich, male, very different positionalities. However, we know that, again, let's talk about like single-family housing. Single-family housing is part of another institutional system that was set up to maintain white supremacy, to give white people an upper hand on others. So if you're not aware of that, let me give you a little bit of background on that. Typically for Black people, for Indigenous and Latinx, other groups of people, Asian, they typically operate collectively, right? So their family unit can be this mother and father with their 2.5 kids, as well as a grandmother and an aunt and an auntie, right? So if they wanted to move to a particular division that was set up to only house white people, and they would say, well, this is a single family development. You can't move in because you have 3 families. So they were deciding how families should be defined, and it was defined based on how white families operated. So that becomes a power place. Now, whether you buy into it or not, you were advantaged by that as a white person in terms of how you could buy, where you could live, and how you could mass wealth. So that still exists in terms of the system. And again, most of the time, you're not going to find these systems that are set up where the power is operating in the other direction. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. We could probably analyze that, but that's not the way most systems are set up. And you can say, well, I work for my employer or in my organization, we're not set up that way. I go, when did you exist? When have you interrogated your rules and policies? When have you interrogated your HR? Have you looked at things? Because it's very difficult to undo something that's been in place. And I think when companies say, well, we've been in business for 70 years, some people might go, yay. I kind of go, oh, ouch, because I wonder what I'm going to experience. If you're operating based on a 70-year-old philosophy, I'm not sure that I want to go in or do business in that space, because I don't know how you've been able to operate and deal with and interrogate how race and racism might operate within your space. No, that's kind of a long answer, but hopefully I answered. If not, just get back with Tandra and we'll go there again, or we can reach out separately and have a more detailed conversation. All right. So again, just to remind you all again, if we are going to end racism, we have to understand, we have to acknowledge, we have to end it before we can heal. And it must be done at all levels. You can't put it on one level and expect that to happen. All right. Let's take a look at a few working definitions. Go ahead, Saray. Yeah.
We do have another question related to this. How do we differentiate institutional racism and systemic racism?
Oh, that was the question for part 2. But since you've asked it, I will put it in there. And so don't expect me to answer this in part 2 if we handle it now. No, that's not so. Institutional racism are the rules within your organization, your family, your home. It is the rules that are set up, that are written, that sets up inequities, inequality between racialized groups and racialized people. Systemic has nothing to do with the way the rules are set up. It happens. And if I give you an example of systemic, we could think about, crack, we could think about powder. There's these different forms of cocaine. But what gets policed? Typically the rock gets policed. Well, who does that typically relate to? Poor people and people of color. So who ends up going to prison? Although if you look at the institutional rules, it will have you believe that everybody is policed the same, everybody is in this criminal legal system the same. That's what the institutional rules say, but what we see systemically is that it's not the way it is. So this is what we say is happening, but let's take a look at what's really happening. And so people start to normalize and accept the systemic things as normal. This is just the way it is. And then we start holding other people accountable to that. And we say, well, they're just bad people who use drugs. That's why all the Black and Latinx people are there. We don't question the institutional and the systemic that happened that got them there. Okay, so that would be the difference between those two. And that is the question. Let's look at a few other working definitions of racism and see how that stacks up to your own working definition of racism. The first one is from Dismantling Racism Works. And they look at racism as a prejudgment plus the social and institutional power. So you have to have a prejudice as well as that. They also talk about racism as being a system of advantages based on your race, or it could be a system of oppression based on your race. And then they talk about it being a white supremacy system. And I know that's a word that really, I wish we had time to totally unpack it today. We don't, but you have to unpack white supremacy in order to understand race and racism. But what I will briefly say is that white supremacy in the context of racism operates in everything. It operates in housing. It operates in the legal criminal system. It operates in banking and finance. It operates in education, yes, in education and academia. It operates in degrees and attainment. It operates in health and healthcare outcomes. It operates in employment opportunities. It operates in humanity and so many other areas. I only named a few. So it operates within those, which is why it's important to interrogate and understand how that works. They also define racism as something different than racial prejudice, hatred, or discrimination. And what I'd like to say about this one is, people will say, well, we have EEO policies, Jackie, we have these rules and we have these laws. So don't they deal with racism? And I'm going to propose to you, no. Your EEO rules and investigations will not deal with discrimination because they don't deal with racism. They don't get to the heart of institutional power. The investigations do not have you interrogate racism. They do not have you interrogate white supremacy to decide what's happening. So if you're counting on your HR policies and your EEO statements to handle and heal and end racism in your organization, it's probably not going to happen, because if that were the case, we would be there already, because many of these things have been in place in a long time. Not the fault of the investigators. You can have the best investigator that's the most equitable investigator out there, but they're still tied by the way the rules and policies are set up and how they define discrimination. So it is not defined or set up, again, institutionally to get to racism, racist system, racist thinking that would impact other people. Go ahead, Tandra.
So we have a good question here. It says, my question is this: I'm assuming most people here are probably aware of the constructed nature of race and the issues that causes. How do we reach those who don't know these things? How do we reach out so that we are not just preaching to the choir? And also, how do we get people to see past their knee-jerk reactions, i.e. those who equate anti-racist with anti-white?
Sure. Oh boy, that's a lot packed in that. So first of all, I want to say that you're never preaching to the choir. As I said up front, the choir's out of tune. When we live in that world that we're the choir and we already get this, we missed opportunities to learn. And you can't ever get to the place where you know it all, right? That's that concept of cultural humility. There's always something more. There's always something to learn. You can never know it all. So you never have a mass that you're getting to. If you have people who don't understand this and don't get it and they can't see it, it's going to be very difficult to have somebody see racism when they don't even believe it exists. So what I would suggest that you might do, if you can encourage them to do this, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. on the Privilege Institute website, he has a 21-day race equity challenge program. I designed a 21-day race equity challenge for Maricopa Community Colleges that we did at the beginning of the year. Our students at Mesa Community College put a fabulous 21-day race equity program together. And it's a space for people to kind of go there on their own to, at their pace, kind of learn and grow and develop and kind of have conversations with themselves and others. So that 21-day race equity challenge is a great place to refer someone to just say, why don't you go ahead and take a look at this? Or if you go through the challenge, then maybe reach out to them and say, hey, here's something that I learned. What do you think about that? Right? Instead of just, banging them over the head with it. So that is a great place to start. And there are many different 21-day race equity challenges. Some are based on looking at the indigenous community. There are those that are steeped in education. So I would put that out there as a great place to start with people who don't get it. Another thing is sometimes you just have to start back at ground zero when people are in denial and say, let's just share a meal and have a conversation about that. Sometimes you have to get back to that space, but also know that if you feel that you are the choir and you already got this, there's still a space for you, even in those spaces that you might think that, well, I'm really above this, I already get that. Because then what I would say, if you already get this and you already know that and you're the choir, what are you doing to teach others the song, right? So I would encourage you to think about that. Wonderful question. Thank you so much. Let me give you a few other definitions of racism that's out there. Again, pervasive, deep-rooted. So again, if it's exploitation, it's deep-rooted, it's long-standing, it creates violence and death and all this. So there's something deep about this concept of racism. So if it's that deep, how do you solve it with a training class? How do you solve it with a dialogue? In order to end and heal, you have to get beyond the dialogue. And for those of you who feel that you're the choir, if all you're doing is having dialogue, I'm going to say that you're not doing enough. What's your actions? What are the actions behind that related to this deep-rooted control and violence that you see as a result of racism? Ibrahim Kindy, I love where he talked about that marriage. It's a marriage. You have racial policies and ideas. You have this marriage happening that normalizes racial inequities to the point that if it's normalized, we all see it as real. And I'm not saying that, that's happening to white. We all do that. So if I was educated and raised and steeped and raised in white norms of operating, chances are I'm operating in those same norms. not chances, I am operating in those norms until I re-educate myself in a different way. I'm not going to define racial inequity policies and all of that, but if you read How to Be an Anti-Racism, you go look at that. Kindy does a great job of explaining those. So again, that you understand how they connect to racism. And typically when I work with people who feel that I'm already here with racism, these are concepts that they can't explain to me. I already got it. Someone else needs to get it. Well, talk to me about the racial inequities in your organization. Where do they exist? Explain to me what policies you've examined and what you're going to do with those policies, right? So I go through this, and 99% of the time, the organizations who bring me in to consult, who feel that they are arrived or they're woke, they can't answer these questions. These are some questions that you need to answer when you're rooting up racism. All right, things to deal with as well. I'm not going to go through all of these, but what I'm going to share with you very quickly, and you can just jot these down. You need to be clear about these other terms that I'm going to talk about, these other concepts and how they operate. You need to be clear about how they operate within your home, your systems, and your places if you want to truly understand racism so that you can end it and that you can heal. So you need to understand white supremacy. You need to also understand how it operates and what you're doing. You can't be afraid of it. You have to look at it and ask the question, not does it operate, how does it operate? What's the impact of that? Who benefits? Who loses? And what are we going to do with that? You need to have a concept of colorism. Colorism and racism is not the same thing. I love when we tell people in Canada, you have a racism problem. What happens in Canada is more colorism than racism. And again, don't have time to explain the difference and why based on what we've done with that, but look, it's different in how it operates. All right. They're cousins or they're relatives. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're different in terms of different. No, they're part of the same family, definitely part of the same family. You have to understand casteism. We love to talk about casteism, about Germany and India and other countries. They have caste systems. It's based on religion and it's based on socio and all these things. Well, we in the United States, as Isabel Wilkinson really points out so clearly in caste, is that the casteism in the United States, or the caste system, is based on the racialization of people. So we can't just see caste happening in other societies and somehow we're exempt from that. And somehow, if we're exempt as the United States, then we're exempt as an organization. So how do we explore and understand casteism within these systems that we're talking about? And then, of course, ethnicity. How does that operate differently from racism in terms of the different collections and community that we have with different groups? All right. Things to think about. Flip through a few resources, and then I want to get to questions. These are just some, and I'm going to actually give Tandra and Saray a list of resources, but these are just some that I like to refer to. Most people are not familiar with the funding of scientific racism. I think that will blow your mind. If you all ever want to do a book club around this, call me in. I'd love to be able to do that with you. The Myth of Race, the Reality of Racism is another good one. The Racial Healing Handbook. Fabulous book, and it really takes you through different phases and steps. Most of this is really about the individual, but it gets to some, within the other levels a little bit. So those are some things to really think about here. So I am going to stop sharing to see if we have any other questions before we move on. I'm going to stop sharing here. Any question, comments, or thoughts? We're down to about 6 minutes, and I do want to take time to answer any questions or hear any comments.
Let's see here. Since we asked some of the questions during the session, let's see which others we have.
I see that there's some raised hands.
And for the raised hands, if you all can just enter your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, then we'll be able to ask those to Jackie.
Great. Why don't you launch the poll while you're waiting for them to have questions? Why don't we launch the poll and kind of see where people are right now? Okay, so you have a poll here with 3 choices. Racism is real, does not exist, I just don't know. Okay. We're not going to wait for 164, but we'll give you time to respond. It looks like pretty much everybody is saying it's real. So, hey, if we have anybody right now in this webinar and they didn't get it when they came, they got it now. They're going, okay, there's some real things happening here. So let's.
I also want to share, I will go to the questions, but I do want to just tell you, Jackie, one of the comments that we have here is this is one of the most amazing Zooms on racism I've had the pleasure of being a part of.
Thank you.
So
we'll
kudos
come back
to
for
you,
part
Jackie.
2.
Yes, indeed. So here are a few of the questions. First being, I have been not identifying my race and ethnicity when applying for jobs because I don't want my white privilege to give me an advantage. I struggle with whether or not I should do this. Can we discuss if possible?
Sure, let's discuss, except I get to do all the talking because they have you on mute. It's not fair. It's not fair. There's more to it than just checking the box related to your race. And most of the time, when people are actually interviewing and they're looking at your application, they don't get that information. That information is usually with HR, or once you do it online, it goes into this other pocket. So it's usually separate. What you see more of in terms of advantages based on race might be how people see names, right? So they may not have anything about the fact that you're white, but they might look at your name and it's Michelle Smith. And then they see Margarita Luna. This is where we see that race kind of creeping in based on names and how we see names. So Margarita might get in over you, not because they saw that you checked the white box, but because names tend to play a part in how people bring people in, what they're comfortable with. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next one is, how would a white person who wants to help combat racism know where or how to start?
Start with the 21-day race equity challenge. And I say that because as you go through that, you're educating yourself. And as you go through, what I found when I just launched that for Maricopa, people came back to me, we would have our roundtables and they had plans of actions. They, within themselves, knew where they were, where they wanted to go, what they want to do within their classroom or within their families. So it allowed them to make the decisions and come up with the plans that best suited where they were on their journey. So that's a great place to start. And again, if you're going through that, I would say find myself or somebody to help process things with you if you feel that there are issues. And again, I go to Google. There's a lot of things on Google, but always go to many different things so that you can kind of discern what's out there to decide who it's coming from, who put it out there, why did they put this out there, to decide what you would like to select. Look at some of the white caucus spaces. And I know we don't do as many within the state of Arizona, but if you, again, Google, there are white caucus spaces of people who work toward anti-racism and liberation, who are working together to do their work.
Now, the next question is, what is the difference between race and ethnicity?
Okay, so race, we defined that race is that constructed thing that we did in the United States to separate groups of people for many different reasons, right? To exploit them, to have power and control. Ethnicity is about who I connect with based on my cultural norms, that we share similar food, we share similar celebrations and things like that, right? That we do, that we've created culturally, not that the government or somebody placed on us based on their definition. So that would be my quick and easy definition between the two. And we do have 2 minutes left. I don't know if you have a burning question, Tanja, but I would like to ask, and we can put this in the chat and do another question, is based on what's been shared here today in this presentation. If someone asked you, what do you mean by healing racism? How would you respond to them? And you say, I want to heal racism. And they said, what do you mean by that? How would you respond? So if some of you can give us your ideas in the chat, I'd appreciate it. And while you're doing that, I will have Tanja ask me the next question if there's another one.
Looks like that was our last question. So I'll start reading some of these comments here. So more knowledge. Dismantle racism. That's very powerful, but also practical information that are different ways to connect with white friends and family on the topic of race and racism. Attend workshops and get educated.
Okay.
I would like for everyone to learn why we are where we are. I would tell them, don't be afraid to get uncomfortable and join the conversation, such as today's conversation.
All right. And I'm going to, just because of time, I know it's time and I want to respect your time. And I totally appreciate the University of Phoenix. And I want to leave you all with this from Dr. Joya Cryer-Perry. And this is something that blocks dealing with racism, as we just go, well, it's just perception. And she says, we have to stop seeing racism and other forms of oppression as merely perceptions of one person compared to another. We have to stop doing that because it serves no purpose for moving forward in terms of healing racism. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I look forward to seeing you all for part 2.
And Jackie, just before we end, just another reminder now that it's more than ever, it's crucial to stay actively engaged with intentional inclusive leadership to successfully impact change within systems that were historically built for a society not as culturally diverse as what we live in today. So our goal here is to share, learn, and redefine the approach to diversity and inclusion to fully integrate equitable practices into daily activities, organizational policies, procedures, strategic goals, and objectives. We want to make diversity and inclusion the essence of business as usual by fostering an inclusive culture where all are valued, respected, and heard. So our series is held on the 3rd Thursday of each month. We ask you to use this QR code to register for our May 20th session. If you enjoyed today, come back and hear more from Jackie on healing racism beyond the dialogue. In part 2, we're going to talk about basic strategies at 4 levels of socialization and oppression. Thank you all so much and have a great rest.